welcome back to the Tech Track at Swiss Cyberstorm. I hope you enjoyed the morning. We're looking very interesting program in the afternoon. We've talked a lot about voting and e-voting, and rightly so, this conference, because it's really a hot topic. We're going to elect a new parliament next Sunday, and as I've announced in the morning, it's not as straight as you would think. It's not like e-voting is dead now, and we return to hand counting of votes. We're in a digitalized world. So the counting of votes, the paper ballots, it's a lot of digitalization in this. So when we did voting by mail in the 1980s, this was like in the old nice world where the postman would deliver the ballots by hand. But this time is over. So I'm very delighted and pleased and really happy to have you guys here. Wow. Christian Killer on the left, he's a PhD candidate at Zurich University, and he's done, let's call it a threat model of voting by mail. He's the first person that ever done this in Switzerland, because on the Swiss federal levels, we have the government, the central government, we have the cantons, but you vote in your municipality, and nobody really has an overview over all the layers and the process involved outside Christian. And Melchior from Limacher is a freelance pen tester who took the results that he had, complementary results that they researched with Swiss cantons, and tells you what the threat model actually means when we're going to elect a new parliament next Sunday. Please welcome Christian and Melchior.
Thank you. So we already had an amazing introduction by Christian. Again, another Christian. Thanks a lot. So as you already could hear, we're not going to talk about electronic voting per se, but about traditional voting channels. And what does that actually mean? For all Swiss people in the room, this is what we're going to talk about, the thing that you received by postal mail. But first, let's start out a little bit broader. So there's a political debate in Switzerland, triggered by many different things, and it's about remote electronic voting efforts. I'm underlining the remote because we're talking about voting via internet to an electronic voting system. And this is a public initiative on a secure and trusted democracy. And this was part of one of the triggers that led to this work. So as you can see, this is the initiative text. It was changed a couple of times in some key sections. But as of now, I'm going to translate this very part to English. So there are a lot of things to unpack here. Let's start with this proposed law basically wants a temporary ban of electronic voting efforts, remote electronic voting efforts. And this ban can only be lifted if it is guaranteed that at least the same security against manipulation exists as in the case of handwritten voting. So let's take a second. What does handwritten voting mean? Nobody knows. Manipulation, how to define manipulation exactly in this context. And third, the most important point is at least the same security. So what is a minimum level of security that we want to reach? What are the metrics that we should use to analyze this? So a bit provocative, we could say, it's clear, right? Remote postal voting is more secure than remote electronic voting because that's what this initiative and also the broader public perceives as more secure. But is it really? So in a more formalized manner, we can say that the Swiss remote postal voting system is fragmented and difficult to generalize due to the federalism in Switzerland and also due to autonomy that we have among the cantons, which is a huge upside. It makes things more flexible. But also there are many, many external suppliers involved, which we're going to highlight later. And we're going to take a security approach to basically identify weaknesses of this system, and we want to improve it. As we heard in the keynote, our goal is not to destroy anything. We want to improve the current system by identifying threat events. And again, a disclaimer, this is a focus on generalization, and we may not cover everything exactly as it is, but as of now, we validated with many stakeholders and many involved players in this field, and it's worth showing. So, from a voter's perspective, in Switzerland, I received this via postal mail from the Swiss Post, delivered to my letterbox. Then I can fill it out, and basically have three options to cast a vote. As you can see, the first option basically is the same way around, so you just send it back by remote post. And the second option is if I physically walk to the municipality letterbox and cast it into the letterbox by myself. And this is often by a lot of people, and before doing this work, I was not aware of people doing that so often. And also it's because some cantons don't prepay the return envelopes, so there's also a cost factor involved. And the third one, the most optimal one from a ballot secrecy point of view, is when you go to the urn, basically disassemble in front of people checking if you're eligible to vote, and then you cast it directly into the urn. So bringing this into context of the whole process flow, we can see that there's some blurry things happening before we actually cast the vote and after. But why not unravel this mystery first by looking at the stakeholders involved? So as of now, we only have we know about ourselves, and we know about the Swiss Post bringing stuff to us and also delivering back. But if we uncover these question marks, we can see that there are many other players involved, also federal government, federal chancellery, election offices on a municipal level, also on a cantonal level, of course, and of course security threats. Then again, we have to map this onto a process, and first of all, we'd like to look at the phase setup and delivery. The setup phase starts basically already with an external supplier involved. This is probably not news to a lot of people in here, that this needs to be produced by a factory that produces voting envelopes, of course, and also the small paper ballot envelope where you cast your paper ballots inside needs to be produced. A second, more complicated step introduces the actual paper ballots, where you put your selection or vote on. And the second very crucial part of the system is the voting signature card. That's where you place your signature, and it is basically your eligibility to vote in Switzerland. And it's based on this electoral register, which is an export from the Einwohnerregister, so all the people that live in a municipality. As you can see, depending on the thing that is voted on or the political matter at hand, different stakeholders are involved. Now we have a change of hands. So everything needs to be assembled correctly. There's also additional material, sometimes from political parties, that needs to be put into this voting envelope. So a lot of manual labor that is normally outsourced to another external supplier. Sometimes it's the same. It really depends on the cantonal setup. But again, then we have this assembled voting envelope, and in the fourth step, we basically have to dispatch it. And we have a change of hands here. So the authority over the voting envelopes goes from the municipality, or for instance in more centralized cantons, from the canton over to the Swiss Post, which offers a special delivery service offering that guarantees that the voting envelopes will be delivered in time. But that's all boring, right? And we'd like to look at some threat events. Melchior?
Thank you. Yeah, there are threat events or attack vectors. We do not discuss all of them due to time constraints. We focus on a few. The first one is threat event 2, the Einwohnerregister, voting register master records. That's quite a common attack. In some countries it is popular among dead people to vote. If we control that Einwohnerregister, we can add or remove voters. For us, it would be difficult to do something there due to consistency requirements. Interesting is the threat event 3. It's the snapshot data. This is an export of the master record, which is used to produce the voting material. It is not uncommon to this date that this snapshot data is transmitted by plain text email. If we could manage to intercept those files, we could add or remove voters. For some actors, this could be possible. It would be difficult for me to actually intercept that email, I think. And the next threat event is number 5, still assembled voting envelopes before they are dispatched. That could be interesting based on social profiling, stealing the voting envelopes the receivers will not miss. Christian, please increase the attack surface.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So again, we're at the same spot that we started at the very beginning. So we are now in the process of casting a vote. We have 3 options. And depending on which path we take, there's a different threat model in place. So if we just do option 1 and 2, where we actually, this will be disassembled by people working in the municipality election office, we have an intermediate step of a storage of voting envelopes, and maybe there's a potential threat event, I don't know. We'll see later. And depending on the canton as well, they're also validating the eligibility, so meaning they look at the ER snapshot data, actually look at who is eligible to vote, and basically double check all the incoming votes. So this is definitely a very good security check to mitigate the risks that we just saw. Second step in the tallying phase includes some e-counting mechanisms, also provided by external suppliers. And next, so that means you actually count the ballots with some assistance tools, because some cantons or municipalities have many paper ballots to count by hand, and it's very complicated. So the next step is interesting, because now you actually have all these different municipalities counting the paper ballots, and they need to report back somewhere, basically to the canton, the intermediate tallies they have, or the final tallies they have. And depending on the canton, they also do some plausibility checks, meaning they have statistics to double check if votings actually go the way they expected them to go. And then they can see, for example, if one municipality just flipped the yes and no votes by entering them into this system, here, then, well, that could be wrong. And they basically can trigger a recount or just a double check. And last but not least, publishing on all levels. This is another validation step, and also a federalistic approach that each level actually has to publish their final tally. But I hope this is enough attack surface for you. I don't know.
Again, we will focus on a few of them. The first one we discussed is threat event 11, access stored voting envelopes. We have more than 2,000 municipalities in Switzerland, and many of them have a storing facility for those voting envelopes. And I think it's safe to assume that not all of them are physically very well protected. It would be risky to walk in there and try to pull something off. But we know of at least one guy who has access to thousands of voting envelopes. So for an insider, it could be interesting. Then next we have threat event 12, that's manipulate the tallying. Depending on the municipalities, we have a broad range of means of counting, from precision scales, why is it here? Okay. Precision scales and banknote counting machines and scanners with computers, e-counting. That would be an interesting field to further investigate. One of the e-counting supplier, he told us they do not need additional security checking because their software is offline. There is some regulation in place, so things are changing slowly. My favorite is threat event 13, manipulate the final tally. It is common that the municipalities transfer their intermediate results to a central server. If it comes to a yes or no vote, it would be risky to manipulate something there, because the municipalities could realize that manipulation in the publication of the final results. But if it comes to complex elections with modified voting cards, like panaschieren, then those municipalities enter each single voting card in the central system separately. So there are checks in place. In one instance, the central systems return a paper receipt, which is by the same team or by another team checked, and after it is made sure that The original voting card and the paper receipt are the same. It is marked as verified on the central database. We think that not all cantons would detect if we would change that records after they were marked as verified. So we need to get in there. We hope that all of these central systems are in an internal network, not in the internet. So we would need to find a way to get into the network first and then move laterally to the central server. We couldn't do that in all Swiss cantons, but if we assume that there are at least 10 systems with cantons or with external suppliers, I think an average penetration tester should be able to at least get on one of those systems. In some instances, it could be even more easy. We have reason to assume that one system has, as a central server, a plain SQL database, and in the municipalities, a good old FAT client employing client-side authentication schemes. So if we manage to get sufficient rights on one of those FAT clients, we could literally do whatever we want on the database. It was even more easy if there was such an SQL server setup with weak or standard passwords or both of it. Let's take a step back. We have attack surface. There are attacks which could be feasible for an average penetration tester, but if we wanted to manipulate, I'm still not sure if we would do that. If we take a further step back and we consider a normal digital native, what does he do? He uses Google, and Google tells him, go to a voting advice application, and the voting advice application tells him what to vote for. If we hack them, we do not have any issues with recounting or stuff like that. Maybe we would not even need to hack them because organizations running such voting advice applications constantly lack of human resources, so we could just offer our help to improve their code. Or maybe run our own voting advice application, open source, verifiable, and just manipulate or change the questionnaire to support our favorite candidates. To address technical issues in processes and systems, we need first to identify weaknesses, vulnerabilities. And to be able to do that, we need transparency. But I think transparency or open source alone is not enough. Security researchers need an incentive to actually go and look for vulnerabilities. It should be clear that today every important software should undergo some security testing before production. However, one penetration tester does only identify a subset of possible attacks. In bug bounties, a larger number of security researchers is enabled to hand in the attacks they see.
Yeah, thank you, Melchior. So I'd like to conclude as well with just a summary of what we saw, that we have a very heterogeneous process, meaning that it was hard to generalize. But we have some very good upsides of this process, which is the physical decentralization, which makes it hard to hit at the same time at different locations. We have a lot of distribution of trust, even though I'd like to maybe raise the question if it would be better to eliminate trust in this system by maybe using approaches over here. And the worst downside is probably substantial trust in third parties due to many different reasons, but I guess that was it from our side. So thanks you for your attention. If you want to check out the paper that is based on, just visit this link. Thanks.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I hope there was news for some of you, or I guess there was news for some of you. Do we have questions in the room? I'm sure we are having questions. Are you stunned? Yeah, there is one. Mick is coming.
What about the last step? Is there a main central server? Because the central server was only cantonal, not? Is there a federal central server?
As far as we could find out, they're just reporting up, and I didn't look further into that. That's a good question.
SEDEX.
Yeah, they're transferring the vote by using SEDEX, is what I could find out, which is a federal tool to encrypt communication, I guess. And I heard from one canton that they're using this tool, but I didn't look further into this very last step.
I think this transition from cantonal to federal is less interesting because the data which is transferred is already public, so they can double check if it was transmitted correctly.
And it will be published on municipal and cantonal level, so you would have to manipulate also municipal and cantonal levels, final tallies, and then it doesn't matter where they're stored because it's already been compromised.
Good. There was a question back there.
So the main difference is actually the federalism between the e-voting and ballot.
Well, there are a lot of differences. I mean...
Yeah, but I mean, one of the main security differences, you could attack both systems, but because the one is decentralized, it's way harder, right?
Yes, exactly. The physical
So we could actually just decentralize e-voting and have many of the benefits.
Yes.
Okay.
And maybe also go with the advice from Melchior to open source and enable public verifiability. And then make it federalized.
Entering that conversation, we're down to a single, more or less active e-voting provider in Switzerland. How many providers of software in this field did you encounter?
Many.
So there are a lot of them, which is kind of good.
Countless, yeah.
Countless.
Yeah.
That helps.
There are a few bigger players, and then there's a lot of individual things in the cantons.
Locally developed Excel macros and,
for instance,
maybe even such things.
Yeah.
One could imagine.
One can imagine. So what else do we have? Come on, more questions? Yeah. That is, I think, close to a canton here.
Did you have any problems with transparency when you were asking electoral authorities how things work?
No, so far they have been really open to collaborate. And that's why this work was possible. So thanks to all the cantons that helped us out. They're also acknowledged in the paper, so no, very open.
So I think we should point out that that was very different than the experience of the e-voting, where it was one private organization that put NDAs on front of them.
Yeah, the private organizations are not that open, generally. They're also involved. These external suppliers are sometimes privately owned, sometimes partially state-owned. So there the story is a bit different, of course, because of reasons. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what's the response rate on a mail-based voting system?
As in response to?
Like, does everyone respond? Is it near a 90% response or?
Numbers.
They expect like 50% voter turnout at the elections next Sunday. So and then with the referendums, which we run 4 times a year, this goes from 30% to maybe 70% if we talk of European Union.
So 50% just don't come back. They just sit on people's...
Just go to the trash.
Yeah. And they drop them in the trash can and somebody picks them up, fills them out, and so you get. Yeah. Go figure.
Also, they're not... Okay, no, never mind.
Final question. There is one at the back.
Do you have any suggestions on how to improve this without going the e-voting way?
Yes. So basically, you want to go or?
I haven't. I think you're rather close to the good solution.
Basically, all those security threats here we can optimize. So from a security point of view, there's a lot to do in all these steps. I think some cantons are very progressive about this and are pushing forward the security prerogative in this, narrative in this. So they're aware of these things, some of them, and there will be some cantons going forward to really push this further. And I think, for example, here we definitely need to improve. Also maybe identity management, but this is a whole other discussion as well. And physical storage security, very crucial. Sometimes this could be improved a lot. Without going into specifics, I'm sorry, but maybe let's discuss later.
I think for the central tallying tool, a quick fix is adjusting the processes to detect any changes after the official verification, but that's hard as these processes are not very flexible. And in long term, I think we need some kind of immutable public lock to avoid the problems. The problem is the central server, and we can very much harden that central server, but there are still the administrators who could cheat us, and I think it's still not acceptable. We need a better solution, but he's into blockchain and stuff.
No. For this case, let me make clear, I'm not speaking about the public permissionless ledger. That could be the solution here, but a public permissioned one where all the authorities are the cantons and they would publish data that we as citizens could actually verify. So I'm not talking about blockchains in the sense of public permissionless blockchains, just to make that very clear.
Much appreciated, because we haven't had a blockchain talk at Swiss Cyberstorm. I hope you appreciate it.
Wow. We got the blockchain stamp. Thanks so much. Amazing.
Good. Thank you guys very much. That was very interesting. Let's keep up the conversation.
Thanks.
Merci.
Thanks a lot.